Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Justice League. With as big of a mess as this stupid film is, it's kind of amazing it's as competent and as enjoyable and as easy to go down as it does. There were tonal shifts, it was definitely recolored and color corrected in weird ways afterwards. There were definite reshoots, there were definite scenes that I kind of wondered, honestly, if what happened with this film was they kept recutting it and an editor who was just kind of like, well, this cut's fine, but they wanted me to present something on Tuesday, so this is like a fine cut. I mean, it's not spectacular. And they showed it and they went, that was it? And he was like, yeah. And they went, oh, well, this is fine. And the editor was a little like, I mean, this isn't the best I could have done with everything. And they were like, we're just done with this. This is good enough. And that's sort of what it's like with this movie. It's like definitely not horrible. It's not as bad. It doesn't miss the mark and kind of go into depths of psychology that don't really work the way other Zack Snyder things in it. There's no post 9/11 stuff, so that was nice. It tries to be an enjoyable blockbuster. It's kind of one of the few times a studio makes a very kind of competent, forgettable, disposable blockbuster, and it kind of works in that way and you're kind of fine with it. Most of the time when they do that, it kind of just fails and doesn't turn out that enjoyable, and I was kind of just sort of fine with it, despite, you know, not having a good villain at all, like having a really bad villain. Like, I don't actually know what this villain did, not really understanding narrative, not understanding what to do with these characters or build these characters, introducing way too many DC superheroes into this movie, so making like the front half super overloaded with like sort of character introductions, bringing back Superman spoilers, I guess. This is a strange movie. It's like part a sort of reboot of the DC EU or whatever it is, the DC Comics movies, where they're definitely trying to rejigger it past Batman v Superman and turn it into something different from the Zack Snyder thing. It definitely feels like a Zack Snyder thing, but also doesn't really understand what it's like to be a team, and it's a Justice League movie. There's a lot going on in this film, but while you're watching it, it doesn't feel like there's a lot going on. You could actually pick this apart and try to figure out what the fuck, like this was probably going this direction, maybe this was going in that direction and they recut it, or they just shot it that way and thought maybe it was going. I honestly feel like they've had so many different scripts while shooting this thing, and it shows. It really does feel like from scene to scene they were like, thought they were going to accomplish something with that scene and maybe forgot about it, but didn't entirely cut that out of it. So sometimes it just feels a little weird referencing certain characters. It definitely favors more Wonder Woman, which is good, but it kind of gets into this weird thing where I think one of the things that the Avengers movie did a lot better was it introduced like a lot of the characters before, other than like, I guess sort of Hawkeye, because he wasn't fully introduced before, or at least Eric Bana's Hulk, sort of. You sort of knew who these characters were before you saw the movie, so a lot of that legwork was done before, that narrative work. And although the Avengers does work on its own, it doesn't work as well on its own, but it does work on its own. The film is made in a way that it knows, you know, it doesn't need to really introduce Hawkeye. In fact, it doesn't really introduce I don't think it does that. Does it? I don't think it does. And it's probably why that film is going to stand as one of probably the more influential major studio films to come out this decade. Not saying it's one of the best. I do think it's really enjoyable. I love The Avengers, but it is an incredibly like momentous film that like almost every studio wishes they could make. And I think Justice League misunderstands, despite having Joss Whedon co-write and direct 20% of this movie, what that film really does and why it is a good idea to introduce people before you have a team-up movie, in that you don't have to waste a bunch of fucking time introducing them and it feels kind of weighted down, and you also like don't really get a sense of them and can't really spend enough time with them. And it's sort of weird since Zack Snyder's made like a bunch of team movies, and this isn't a Watchmen diss necessarily, it's more about like all his team movies, and he's usually a lot better at it. I think Sucker Punch was better at using different personalities than Justice League is, or his Dawn of the Dead remake, or countless others. Like, he understood to use the different personalities, but it often feels like he knows how to use Wonder Woman and Batman and the Flash, but Aquaman he doesn't really seem to know what to do. And I don't really understand why Aquaman's in like 10 era Pearl Jam or something. Like, I know that Aquaman now is more like a Conan the Barbarian type of character, and I guess getting the last guy who played Conan the Barbarian made sense. I don't know. And it sort of works, but it's a little weird that one of the least interesting characters in this whole thing is the guy who's getting a spin-off movie next. Probably speaks more to what's sort of wrong with everything they're doing here. And then even Cyborg is like important to the story, and you think because narratively it actually makes more sense to go into him. Like, let's say there was an Aquaman movie before this and a Flash movie before this, theoretically, I think you could have saved Cyborg for this movie because it kind of works better within like what the villain is and everything like that, and you could have maybe cared a little bit more. But it just feels a little weird, and the Steppenwolf thing really hurts it because not really having a distinct villain other than just a normal kind of anonymous CG villain, it's sort of the problem with the Wonder Woman kind of third act thing, where certainly like that was the weaker part of Wonder Woman, but it's accentuated to such a degree because this is supposed to be like the big bad. And when I saw the movie, a lot of people in the audience were saying it was bullshit. You made a Justice League movie, you made this big event movie, and you didn't have Darkseid. One guy said, I've been reading comic books for 19 years and I just sit through motherfucking Steppenwolf. And it's true, like Steppenwolf not only is not, I'd never even really heard of him, but I think the other problem is he doesn't feel like a major villain. Whether you knew who Loki was or not, you understood he was a big deal. And you're not really getting that. You're just getting like another superhero villain in this. And I think one of the things this film will probably be pointed as, despite we've had a pretty good comic book movie year, I think we've had a really good one between Logan and Spider-Man Homecoming and an actual good Thor movie and fucking Wonder Woman. It's just been Lego Batman. When you get to Justice League, it sort of highlights the whole idea of superhero fatigue, despite the fact that the genre is actually sort of exciting. I mean, I probably can list more really good comic book movies that came out this year than like kind of forgettable big blockbuster ones that we're all kind of groaning at or something. And that really shows how good the genre is currently. And I think Justice League doesn't really show that. It's going to be, you know, at Thanksgiving, your uncle is going to say, I don't know, I'm sick of superhero movies. I saw that Justice League, and you're going to have to listen to him complain about it. I'm not going to say any of those audience members are wrong. This feels like going through the genre, hitting the beats it's supposed to. It is so concerned with hitting the beats, it didn't think about writing a script that organically does hit those beats. It almost feels like the film forces itself through editing to do that, which is a fucking weird thing to watch. It's like, it does feel like chopped together, and like suddenly we're ending scenes. That there's such a dislocation in terms of watching this film, but also having some fun with it, watching Wonder Woman fight, watching Ezra Miller as the Flash, watching, even I was sort of fine with Batman a little bit, watching all that stuff, but sort of feeling like things were like, where is this person? I guess they were busy during this thing. Like a lot of that sort of didn't entirely make sense, where certain people were in certain periods. It just like felt like they would like drag things out sometimes, but other times they cut things too quickly. It really felt like this film needed to be longer, and there needed to be more time, and we could have gotten more time with the team building and so forth. I normally am not saying I want a longer DC movie, but I think in this case I actually sort of think that would have worked better. When you have a Justice League movie, this is the last big team up film, and this is probably seriously the last comic book thing where people are like, we've always waited for this movie. And the Justice League, I mean, it's like kind of a big momentous comic book when it premiered. It's highly influential. It actually is one of the influences that paved the way for the Marvel editor-in-chief to make the Fantastic Four and things like that. It is a big deal, and it's not really treated as such. It's treated like a big corporate conglomerate. And that's one of the things that I find really interesting about this. You have one of the most expensive films ever made, yet it doesn't feel like anyone involved really cares that much. One of the things I even sort of liked more, I guess, about Batman v Superman is the idea of hinting at the ideas of, you know, these bigger DC stories and these bigger DC comics ideas that, as someone who have read Batman comics and has read some DC stuff but has never been as into it, I sort of was interested in that. But I've gotten that more from the animated movies. That's why I watch and review those, is because I actually find them really interesting. I'll be like, oh, so you made a miniseries of this? That's an interesting concept. It's cool, but I don't get that through this. And I think one of the things that the Marvel movies and even the Fox movies and even the failed attempts at Spider-Man try to do is they try to show you the lore of that. And I think with Justice League, they didn't really do that at all. It felt like there was no one in charge who like really loved the stories and understood how conceptually they could get those stories and adapt them in a certain way. It just felt like they were like, we need to get this Justice League movie to be competent and semi-enjoyable and not a total shit show the way Batman v Superman was. And I think in a way, like, yes, this isn't the shit show Batman v Superman was. It's sort of a different shit show, but it's an inoffensive shit show that kind of just does its thing, and you're like, okay, that's fine. I mean, I don't think anyone would say this was horrible, but you're kind of like, it's not horrible, it just sort of is. No one can have a hot take on it because it's totally lukewarm. It's just kind of like, how did this get to be the way it is? You know, it feels like too many things going on at once. It also feels like it sort of competently is a movie. I mean, there's certain things that are just weird, like how much odd CG the studio clearly threw at this, how they color corrected it in weird places, which people have already shown online. I'm sure you can find those. Though few shots of Henry Cavill's mustache being taken out. The first shot is the main one that I didn't notice as much, but the first shot was like really glaring. Those were kind of just weird. It was mainly focused on the three of Batman, the Flash, Wonder Woman, and Superman would show up and he's great, but doesn't really have much chemistry with everyone, which is again a problem for a team movie. The Justice League has like no chemistry. It's like sort of fun seeing them together. It's like watching the chemistry of sort of three people that works in some scenes. I mean, that's the weird thing about the editing of this film. You'll see certain things and it cuts off in certain ways, and then you're like, okay, I guess that was the information I needed for this scene. Good news though, nobody says Martha, so that's cool. I'm kind of just like noticing how kind of uneventful this huge, massive movie is. It kind of just wants to be fine with you, so you'll just sort of let it happen. But I sort of don't think it does happen. There's no excitement to it. There's no, these people are together. Holy shit, they're fighting people. And like, I feel like the DC movies, there's no real love of the DC stuff in it. And that's the biggest problem with the DC things. What Patty Jenkins brought to Wonder Woman is she gave a shit. And there's none of that in here. What they want is a big blockbuster the way Marvel and the Avengers did. That's a merchandising bonanza. And I guess in very surface level, they did it. But there's no real love of this. In terms of storytelling, in terms of narrative, it is a complete and utter disaster. But I think the miracle and the only fascinating thing is that you can watch this and just admire at how it kind of competently works and entertains you, but that's sort of kind of just in a very passable way, which is ridiculous for this kind of a film. It is a huge disappointment, but it's a huge disappointment that you're like, I mean, it's fine. And like, that's so weird. Like, that's the weirdest thing about it, I think. It's like Batman v Superman was a huge, colossal, like, disappointment. It had like highs and lows to it that I think this film doesn't achieve either. It just kind of like goes down the middle in a way that I just question what's going on at Warner Brothers between this and those Fantastic Beasts movies. I'm like, are you guys just like kind of fine with just hoping we'll just show up to this stuff and we'll be sort of cool with these things, and if you don't make them too bad and you definitely aren't going to make them too good, then this will sort of work out. It feels like Wonder Woman was kind of a fluke that they don't know how to entirely handle, and Justice League is kind of really the norm over there. This feels like a studio that doesn't really entirely understand why Marvel worked, and they got the guy who directed the Avengers to help out and kind of fix it, and it's still, you know, maybe it's a little funnier because of that. I'm not exactly sure what shots are Joss Whedon's and what shots are Zack Snyder at this point, but it's sort of like kind of gives me a whole bowl of like, who cares? Like, I think this in a lot of ways ends up being the least remarkable of the DC movies. You had a huge momentous kind of motion picture and you just let it come out and just be fine with everyone. This is sort of like what happens when that tree falls in the woods, but it's a movie with Batman and Wonder Woman and Superman and the Flash in it. This is it, and I'm like not disappointed or mad. I'm just like, all right, let's move on. So if you have seen Justice League and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. Yeah.